My name is Millie Porter, 27 years old, a sergeant first class in the United States Army. The day I was awarded the Purple Heart, my stepmother, Linda, used a metal folding chair to break my arm in front of hundreds of soldiers. The sound of the bone snapping was louder than the applause. But what hurt more was the sentence she hissed as I fell. A sentence that not even the enemy in Kandahar had ever dared to say to me. "Who do you think you are, you whore? You put on that suit and think you're better than us? You're still just Porter trash." She, my father, and their precious son all laughed in triumph. They didn't know that the three-star general I had just helped was holding a file that could bury their entire family alive. Let me know what time you're hearing this story in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been publicly humiliated by the very people you sacrificed for. Justice is coming. The weight of the Army service uniform, the blue dress as we call it, is something you never get used to. It's a formal, restrictive weight steeped in history. The wool is thick, the cut is precise, and it forces you to stand taller. On that stage, under the warm, unforgiving lights of the Fort Stewart Auditorium, I felt every single thread. The real weight, though, was the small, heart-shaped medal pinned just above my left pocket, the Purple Heart. It felt heavier than my rifle, heavier than my pack, heavier than the memory of the explosion that earned it. A wave of polite, respectful applause washed over me from the sea of uniformed soldiers and their families. For a fleeting second, a fragile sense of pride swelled in my chest. This was the moment they tell you about in basic training, the moment that's supposed to make all the sleepless nights, the grueling marches, and the terror of combat worthwhile. This was validation. This was honor. But my honor felt hollow, and my pride was a lonely island. My eyes scanned the crowd and found them in the third row. My family. Linda, my stepmother, had her head tilted toward my half-brother, Kyle. I couldn't hear her words, but I didn't need to. I saw the conspiratorial whisper, the way her lips curled into a smirk that Kyle mirrored perfectly. They weren't looking at a soldier being honored. They were watching a circus act, a tedious delay before they could get to the buffet. And then there was my father, Daniel. He wasn't looking at them, and he wasn't looking at me. He was staring intently at his own polished shoes, as if they held the answers to the universe. His posture was a portrait of practiced indifference, a complete and total refusal to participate in my moment. In that instant, I realized the painful truth. I was on a stage, surrounded by strangers who saw a hero, while my own family, my designated audience of honor, saw nothing more than an inconvenience. The ceremony concluded. As I stepped down, General Robert Hayes, the three-star legend who had pinned the medal on my chest, took an unsteady step. He was an older man, and the long ceremony had clearly taken its toll. My training kicked in automatically. I reached out, my hand steadying his elbow. "Easy there, General," I said quietly. It was a simple act of respect, a reflex. But from the third row, it was an unforgivable crime. A sharp hiss cut through the fading applause. "Putting on a show again." The voice was Linda's, dripping with a familiar, acidic poison. To her, my kindness was a performance. My respect was a charade designed to make her look bad. I turned my head just in time to see her rise from her seat. The pleasant church lady smile she wore for the public had melted away, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated envy. She wasn't walking. She was striding, moving with a predator's purpose down the aisle. Her cheap, drugstore perfume, a cloying floral scent, arrived a second before she did. In that moment, I knew. The hunt was on, and I was the prey. Time seemed to warp, stretching and slowing down. I saw her snatch a metal folding chair from the end of a row. The fluorescent auditorium lights glinted off the steel frame as she raised it high. There was no hesitation in her movement, no flicker of doubt. This was deliberate. This was a verdict. My body reacted before my mind could process the betrayal. I threw my left arm up to protect my head, a desperate, instinctual block. The impact was a sickening, white-hot explosion of pain. There was a sound, a horrifyingly intimate sound that would be seared into my memory forever. It wasn't a loud crack like in the movies. It was a dense, wet, fibrous snap. The sound of my own ulna bone giving way under the force of the blow. It was a sound louder and more obscene than any explosion I'd heard in Afghanistan. It silenced the entire room. The collective gasp of 200 people sucked the very oxygen from the air. I crumpled to the floor, the world tilting into a dizzying smear of blurred faces and bright lights. But the physical agony was nothing compared to the words that followed. As I lay there, clutching my shattered arm, Linda stood over me, the chair still in her hand, and she delivered the curse she had been waiting her whole life to cast. "Who do you think you are, you little whore?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous, meant only for me but echoing in the dead silence of the hall. "You put on that costume and think you're better than us? You're still just porter trash." Whore. Trash. The words didn't just insult me, they defined me. They were the labels they had stitched into my soul since I was a child. They were meant to strip away the uniform, the rank, the medal, and remind me that in their world, I would never be anything more than the dirt on their shoes. The most horrific part wasn't the broken bone or the vile words. It was what happened next. Through the haze of pain, I heard a bark of laughter, sharp and cruel. It was Kyle. He was laughing with genuine, unrestrained delight, his face glowing with satisfaction as he watched his older sister writhing in agony and humiliation. And then, my eyes found my father. He sat perfectly still, a statue of cowardice in his Sunday best. He did not move to help me. He did not cry out in protest. He did not even flinch. His empty eyes met mine for a fraction of a second before darting back to the safety of the floor. There was no anger, no shock, no pity. There was nothing. And that nothing was the cruelest complicity of all. His silence wasn't just inaction. It was an endorsement. It was his quiet, unspoken agreement with every word Linda had said, with every ounce of force she had put into that swing. His silence told me, yes, you deserve this. Linda's strike had broken my arm. My father's silence had just shattered my soul. Just as the darkness began to creep into the edges of my vision, a shadow fell over me. Strong hands gently gripped my good arm. It was General Hayes, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. He pulled me carefully to my feet, his eyes never leaving the Porter family. He didn't say a word to them. He didn't have to. With me leaning on him, he looked past them, toward the main entrance of the auditorium. His chin lifted in a barely perceptible, yet unmistakable signal. At the back of the hall, 2 military police officers, who had been standing at ease, immediately straightened up. They understood the command. They began to move. The harsh, sterile light of the base infirmary was a world away from the warm glow of the auditorium. A young medic, his face a mask of professional calm that couldn't quite hide his horror, was carefully cutting away the sleeve of my dress blues. The pain in my arm was a dull, throbbing bass line beneath the sharp treble of humiliation. My uniform jacket was draped over the back of a chair, and my eyes kept drifting to it. Pinned to the dark blue wool was the Purple Heart. I noticed a tiny dark smear on the rich purple ribbon, almost invisible, a single speck of my own blood. That small crimson stain on a symbol of honor sent my mind tumbling backward in time, not to the dust and chaos of Kandahar, but to another polished symbol, another kind of desecration. Back to a sunlit bedroom in Charleston, South Carolina, and the day my spirit was broken long before my bone ever was. Growing up, my bedroom was my sanctuary, and its centerpiece was a long wooden shelf my grandfather had built. That shelf was my entire identity. It groaned under the weight of my achievements. Dozens of medals on bright ribbons and rows of gleaming golden trophies from track and field. 100-meter dash, 200-meter, 400 relay. Each one represented hundreds of hours of sweat, burning lungs, and the sweet taste of victory. They were proof that I, Millie Porter, was good at something. That I was more than just the quiet stepdaughter who tried to stay out of the way. That shelf was the only place in the world I felt seen. I was 15. I came home from practice one Tuesday afternoon, my gym bag slung over my shoulder, and the first thing I noticed was the silence. The shelf was empty. Bare wood. Not a single trophy, not a single medal remained. Dust outlines were the only ghosts of what had been there. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, settled in my stomach. I found Linda in the living room, casually painting her nails a violent shade of pink. The acrid smell of nail polish remover hung in the air. She didn't look up when I walked in. "Linda," I began, my voice trembling slightly. My trophies. They're gone." She blew gently on her nails, then inspected them with a critical eye. "Oh, that," she said, her tone utterly dismissive, as if I'd asked about a misplaced pair of socks. "I was just tidying up. All that cheap scrap metal was taking up so much space, honey." Kyle needed room for his new comic book collection. Scrap metal. The words hit me harder than any fist could. I stood there, frozen, unable to form a reply. She hadn't just cleaned my room. She had erased my history. She had taken the one thing that was mine, the one thing I had earned, and declared it worthless. I found them later, just as I knew I would. They were in the big green trash can out by the curb, tossed in with coffee grounds and greasy pizza boxes. I pulled them out, one by one. The proud, winged figure on top of my state finals trophy was bent sideways, its golden plating scraped and smeared with grime. I sat on the grass behind our house that afternoon, trying to bend them back into shape, crying silent, hot tears of pure, helpless rage. That was the day I learned the Porter family rule. My accomplishments were disposable. The rule was reinforced 2 years later. My first real Army paycheck hit my bank account at Fort Jackson. It wasn't much, but to me, it felt like a fortune. It was the first money I'd ever earned that was completely my own. I had a plan. I was going to the PX and buying myself a pair of sturdy, beautiful leather boots I'd been eyeing for weeks. A small gift, a reward for surviving the hell of basic training. That evening, I called home, wanting to share my good news. My father answered. The moment he heard my voice, he started in with a fake, tearful tremor. It was a performance I knew all too well. He'd had a bad run at the poker table, he sobbed. He owed some guys money, serious money. He didn't know what he was going to do. Linda got on the extension, her voice all sweet concern, mentioning how the refrigerator was on its last legs and how a new one would be a blessing for the whole family. The dream of my new boots dissolved into the static of their demands. I wired them nearly the entire amount, leaving myself just enough for toothpaste and soap. I waited for a thank you. A text? Anything. Nothing came, not from them anyway. 2 days later, a message from Kyle popped up on my phone. "Send more next time. This isn't enough for the new sneakers I want." No hello. No thank you. Just a demand. I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was an ATM. My father's resentment went deeper than money. Daniel had dreamed of going to West Point his whole life, but his grades and his attitude had slammed that door shut. My success in the one institution he revered was a personal insult, a constant walking reminder of his own failure. He never once told me he was proud. Instead, he'd get a few beers in him on my visits home, and the bitterness would spill out. "The Army's different now," he'd slur, staring at the TV, never at me. "They take women. It wasn't like that in my day. It was tougher then." He could never look me in the eye when I was in uniform. He'd look at my boots, my insignia, the wall behind me, anywhere but at my face. My uniform wasn't a source of pride for him. It was a mirror reflecting a life he never had. The ultimate lesson in my own insignificance came on Thanksgiving. I was stationed at Fort Bragg and managed to get a surprise 72-hour leave. I was ecstatic. I drove the 5 hours straight through the night, fueled by gas station coffee and the fantasy of a real family holiday. I walked through the front door around 6 p.m., my duffel bag in hand, a tired but happy grin on my face. The laughter from the dining room died the moment they saw me. They all stared, Linda, Daniel, Kyle, and Linda's sister, as if a complete stranger had just wandered into their home. Linda recovered first, a tight, annoyed smile plastered on her face. "Millie, goodness, you didn't call. What a surprise." She gestured vaguely toward the table. "Well, come on in, I guess. All the turkey's gone." All the turkey's gone. 4 words that told me everything. They hadn't saved me a plate. They hadn't even considered the possibility. I spent my Thanksgiving eating a cold leftover turkey and mayonnaise sandwich alone in the kitchen, listening to the sounds of their laughter and conversation floating in from the other room. They never once called for me to join them. I didn't stay the night. I got back in my beat-up Honda and drove back to base, tears streaming down my face. That was the moment I finally accepted it. I was a member of the Porter family by name only. In every way that mattered, I was utterly, completely alone. If you've ever been made to feel like a stranger in your own home, or had your accomplishments treated like trash, please support this story by hitting the like button and type, "I see you" in the comments below. So I know I'm not alone. The medics finished their work, my broken arm now secured in a temporary cast. The physical pain was nothing. A bone can be set. It will heal. But as I sat there, I wondered, how do you set a soul that has been systematically broken for 27 years? The hum of the infirmary faded into the background as the memories of my past swirled and settled. Through the open doorway, I could see General Hayes. He wasn't looking at me. His back was turned as he spoke in low, serious tones to the 2 MPs who had escorted my family away. He was a figure of calm, decisive authority. He was taking control. For me. The sight of it sent a tremor through me, a feeling so foreign I could barely name it. It was the feeling of being defended. A thought, clear and sharp as a rifle crack, cut through the fog of pain and memory. I dragged myself out of that mud once before. I can do it again. My eyes fixed on the general's rigid posture, the 3 silver stars on his collar. But this time, I thought, a new, hard resolve forming in my gut. This time, I'm not alone. The escape had started at 18, with a bus ticket to Columbia, South Carolina, and a 10-week reservation in hell, also known as Fort Jackson. Basic training was, by design, a systematic breaking down of the individual. It was 90-degree heat, suffocating humidity, and the constant gravelly roar of a drill sergeant's voice tearing you apart for every perceived flaw. It was push-ups in the mud until your arms screamed, 10-mile marches that left your feet blistered and bleeding, and a deep, gnawing homesickness that tasted like stale MREs. Most of the girls in my platoon cried themselves to sleep at night. For me, it was paradise. It was the first time in my life that the rules were the same for everyone. The first time my sweat and my pain were measured on the same scale as the person next to me. No one cared that I was a stepdaughter. No one called me trash. When Drill Sergeant Reyes screamed in my face that I was a worthless maggot, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. Because he was screaming the exact same thing at the girl on my left and the girl on my right. We were all worthless maggots, together. My effort was the only thing that mattered. When I finished a run first, I was praised. When I scored expert on the rifle range, I was recognized. Here, I wasn't Millie Porter, the family disappointment. I was Private Porter, a soldier. And for the first time, that felt like enough. But freedom, I quickly learned, came with a price tag. And my family was more than happy to send me the bill. After I finished my advanced training, the calls for help became a regular feature of my life. To keep up with their endless cycle of debts and desires, I took a second job. My weekdays belonged to the Army, but my weekends belonged to the Drunken Soldier, a dive bar just off base that smelled of stale beer and desperation. For 2 years, my life was a relentless, exhausting loop. My shift would end at 2 a.m., Saturday and Sunday nights. I'd spend an hour on my hands and knees, mopping up sticky spills and, more often than not, vomit from some private who couldn't handle his liquor. I'd get back to the barracks by 3 a.m., my clothes reeking of cheap whiskey and fried food. The alarm would go off at 5 a.m. for Monday morning PT. I lived in a permanent state of bone-deep fatigue, my body running on fumes and sheer willpower. I did it all just to wire money to an account in Charleston, which was always followed by a call from Linda complaining that it wasn't quite enough to cover the new, whatever it was they suddenly needed. The breaking point, the moment a crucial wire inside me finally snapped, came not on a sticky bar floor, but in the dust and heat of Kandahar, Afghanistan. Our platoon had been ambushed on patrol that day. It was a chaotic, terrifying firefight that ended with all of us making it back, except for a young private named Miller. He was gone. The mood back at the FOB was heavy with grief and shock. I was sitting in a concrete bunker, my rifle across my lap, my hands still shaking, trying to process the fact that a boy I'd shared a joke with that morning was never coming home. My satellite phone buzzed. It was Kyle. A wave of relief washed over me. For a foolish second, I thought maybe he'd heard something and was calling to check on me. "Hey, Millie," he said, his voice annoyingly cheerful. "You are not gonna believe this place. The skiing in Aspen is insane." I sat there, stunned into silence, the sand and grit of Afghanistan clinging to my uniform. "The resort is okay," he continued, completely oblivious. "I mean, for the price you paid, I was kinda hoping for something a little more high-end, you know? The thread count on these sheets is probably criminal." He was complaining about the luxury of a ski trip. A trip he was on using the combat pay I was earning in a place where people were actively trying to kill me. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask if I was safe. He didn't even seem to register where I was. In that moment, surrounded by the very real possibility of death, listening to his petty, trivial complaints, something inside of me just died. The hopeful daughter, the dutiful sister, she bled out right there on the dusty floor of that bunker. After that, I continued to send money, but it was no longer an act of love or duty. It was a tax, a fee I paid to keep them out of my life as much as possible. Each payment was another invisible sacrifice, another piece of my own life I had to carve out and give away. I'd saved up for months to buy a used Ford F-150, a beautiful beat-up truck I'd dreamed of owning since I was 16. I found the perfect one. The day I was going to buy it, Linda called, crying about a leak in the roof. The truck fund became the roof fund. A week later, she posted a photo album on Facebook titled "Our New Patio Oasis," showcasing a brand new, top-of-the-line wicker patio set with plush cushions. There was no new roof. My best friend, Sarah, got married in Ohio. I was supposed to be her maid of honor. 2 weeks before the wedding, Kyle called in a panic. He'd maxed out his credit cards and was getting threatening letters. If I didn't help him, he said, his life would be ruined. I looked at my bank account. I could afford the plane ticket to Ohio, or I could pay his debt. I couldn't do both. I watched my best friend get married on a grainy video call, making up an excuse about being unable to get leave. I sent the money to Kyle. He never mentioned it again. Every sacrifice was swallowed by a void of entitlement. Every piece of my life I gave them was simply consumed without a word of thanks, and they were always, always hungry for more. They didn't just break my arm in that auditorium. They had been breaking my life, piece by piece, for years. And I had let them. General Hayes saw the grim-faced MPs take my father, Linda, and Kyle by the arms and escort them firmly toward the auditorium exit. He watched them go, his expression as hard as granite. Only when they were out of sight did he turn his attention back to me. The auditorium was a mess of hushed, frantic whispers and shocked faces, but the general's focus was entirely on me. Without a word, he shrugged his own heavy formal Class A jacket from his shoulders. It was an act of such unexpected kindness it stunned me into silence. He gently draped the jacket over my own shoulders. It enveloped me, smelling of clean starch, old leather, and something else I couldn't quite place: authority. It was far too big, the sleeves hanging down past my hands, but it was the warmest, safest thing I had felt in my entire life. "Let's go, Sergeant," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble that cut through the chaos. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a gentle command. "You need a hot cup of coffee." He led me away from the prying eyes, down a quiet, carpeted hallway to his office. The nameplate on the door read, "LTG, Robert Hayes." I felt a fresh wave of intimidation. I had spent my entire career trying to be invisible to men with stars on their shoulders. Being yelled at by a superior was normal. Being cared for by one felt fundamentally wrong, like a violation of the natural order. His office was exactly as I'd imagined. A large, dark mahogany desk stood before a wall of flags, standing silent and proud in their gilded stands. The walls were covered with military honors, commendations, and photographs of stern-faced men shaking hands with presidents and foreign dignitaries. It was a room that radiated power and history. I felt small and out of place, a dirty piece of trash that had been dragged into a museum. I stood awkwardly by the door, clutching the oversized jacket around me. General Hayes didn't sit behind his desk. He walked over to a small side table where a Keurig machine sat. He took 2 clean, heavy ceramic mugs from a cabinet. "Cream, sugar?" he asked, his back to me. "Black is fine, sir," I mumbled, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't press me about what happened. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't say a word about my family. He simply prepared the coffee, the quiet whir and gurgle of the machine the only sounds in the room. He brought one of the mugs over, holding it with 2 hands, and offered it to me. I took it with my good hand, the warmth of the ceramic seeping into my cold fingers. He motioned for me to sit in one of the leather armchairs facing his desk, while he took the other. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, holding his own mug. For a long moment, he just looked at me, his gaze steady and thoughtful. I braced myself for the questions, for the report I'd have to file, for the official, bureaucratic nightmare that was about to begin. Instead, he asked a single, simple question that changed everything. "In Kandahar," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "What unit were you with?" The question was a key, unlocking a door inside me I didn't even know was there. It bypassed the broken arm, the humiliation, the family drama. It went straight to the core of who I was. He wasn't asking the victim, he was asking the soldier. And the soldier answered. The words came pouring out of me, not in a torrent of tears and emotion, but in the clear, concise language of a mission debrief. I told him I was with the 3rd Infantry Division, attached to a forward operating base near the Arghandab River. I told him about the long, grueling patrols under the relentless Afghan sun, the constant tension, the weight of the body armor. I told him about my squad mates, about the dark humor we used to stay sane, about the bonds forged in shared fear and absolute trust. I talked about the firefight that earned me my medal, the ringing in my ears, the taste of dust and cordite in my mouth, the courage of the medic who saved my life. General Hayes listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes. He just listened, his eyes never leaving my face. He would nod slowly, and every so often, he'd ask a sharp, insightful question. "What was your TOE for that patrol? Were you using the 7.62s or the 5.56s for Overwatch?" He knew the language. He understood the world. For the first time in my life, I was speaking to someone in my family's generation who saw me not as a failure, a disappointment, or a paycheck, but as a professional. As an equal. He saw a sergeant first class. When I finally ran out of words, the silence returned. But this time it was comfortable, filled with a sense of profound and complete understanding. He took a slow sip of his coffee, then placed the mug down on the table beside him. He looked me straight in the eye, and his gaze was like steel. "Sergeant Porter," he began, and the formality of my rank in his voice was a balm to my soul. "For what you went through over there, this country owes you a debt that can never be repaid. We all do." He paused, letting the words sink in. Then his expression hardened. "As for what just happened in that hall," he continued, his voice dropping to a low, furious growl, "that is not family. That is a disgrace to the uniform you are wearing, a disgrace to every soldier in that room, and I will not let it stand." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow, but it was a blow that healed, not harmed. He wasn't just offering comfort, he was delivering a verdict. He was giving me validation. In 2 sentences, he had lifted the suffocating weight of shame that Linda had so expertly placed on me, and in its place, he restored my honor. I felt tears welling up, but for the first time in as long as I could remember, they weren't tears of pain or rage. They were tears of gratitude. We sat for a few more minutes in silence. When I had finally composed myself, he stood. "Come on, Sergeant, let's get you properly looked at." As we stepped out of the quiet sanctuary of his office, I saw them. Standing awkwardly in the hallway was a small group of soldiers from my unit. Sergeant Evans, Corporal Diaz, and Specialist Riggs. They weren't looking at me, pretending to be interested in a bulletin board on the wall, but I knew they were waiting for me. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. Evans stepped forward. "Rough day, Sarge," he said gruffly, and pressed a Hershey's chocolate bar into my good hand. Diaz, a tough kid from the Bronx who rarely spoke, just reached out and gave my good shoulder a light, firm pat. Riggs just nodded, his eyes saying everything that words couldn't. It wasn't blood that connected us. It was something stronger. It was shared hardship, loyalty, and unwavering respect. They were my family. In that moment, standing in a quiet hallway at Fort Stewart with a broken arm and a general's jacket on my shoulders, I finally realized the truth. I had never been truly alone. I had just been looking for family in all the wrong places. The warmth of the general's office vanished when I entered the next room. It wasn't an office. It was a SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, a windowless, soundproofed box where the Army uncovers its enemies. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. This was about more than a broken arm. Two men in civilian clothes were waiting. They introduced themselves as agents from Army Counterintelligence, CID. Their faces were neutral, their eyes missing the pity I'd seen in everyone else's. They were here for facts. They sat me down at a plain metal table. The interview started strangely, not with the assault, but with phone calls. "Sergeant Porter," the older agent began, "over the past 18 months, have you spoken to anyone claiming to be a journalist or a researcher studying military family life?" The question was so specific it took me a moment. Then, a memory surfaced. "Yeah, a couple of times," I said slowly. Linda would usually call, all excited, saying some writer wanted to interview a real soldier. She said it would be good for people to understand our sacrifice. The agents exchanged a look I almost missed. "And what did you talk about?" the younger one asked. I shrugged my good shoulder. "Nothing important, generic stuff." They asked what a typical morning was like on base, PT, breakfast at the DFAC. Benign questions. "Benign," the older agent repeated, writing it down. "Did they ever ask about patrol schedules, operational routines?" "Sort of," I admitted, unease stirring in my gut. One of them asked if we tended to patrol the same areas to build a relationship with the local community. I just gave her the textbook answer about winning hearts and minds. I didn't give her grids or anything classified. I thought I had been careful, protecting operational security. But a cold feeling was starting to creep up my spine. The next phase of the interview felt like an attack. The younger agent turned a laptop to face me. On the screen was a series of my father's bank statements. "Are you familiar with your father's financial situation, Sergeant?" "Only that he's always losing money gambling," I said. The agent traced a line on the screen. "On May 12th of last year, a deposit of $20,000 was made into this account. Can you account for that?" I stared at the number, $20,000. A few weeks after that date, Linda had bought a new SUV. They'd told me Daniel had a lucky streak with scratch-off tickets. A memory surfaced of him bragging on the phone about how his ship had finally come in. "No," I whispered, my mouth suddenly dry. The agent scrolled down. "Another deposit, $30,000, October 7th. My blood ran cold. I knew that date. October 7th was the day Sergeant Peterson and Corporal Jensen were killed by an IED on a routine patrol. An IED planted on a route we had used a dozen times before, without incident. The agent kept scrolling. Each large, unexplained deposit, each time my father had won the lottery, lined up with sickening precision to a dark day on my unit's calendar. An attack, a casualty, a tragedy. The new patio furniture, the shopping sprees, the Aspen ski trip. It was all there. A timeline of greed paid for in blood. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't coincidence. This was a pattern. Then came the final piece. They showed me the chat logs from a gaming forum Kyle frequented, pages of his online conversations under the username GoldenBoy43. He was bragging to his online friends, people he only knew by screen names, about his big sister, the Army sergeant. He posted pictures I'd sent home, of me and my squad mates in front of our MR app, photos taken inside the wire. He talked about my leave schedule, when I'd be flying home for R&R. He even dropped the names of guys in my platoon, complaining about how one of them, Sergeant Davis, was a hard ass. The information was piecemeal, trivial details. But the agents explained how, to an enemy analyst, these scraps were gold. A photo from inside the base could reveal layout vulnerabilities. A leave schedule could pinpoint troop rotation times. A name could be cross-referenced, a soldier targeted. They weren't just stupid messages. They were intelligence leaks, delivered with an arrogant smile. I sat there in the sterile room, the evidence laid out before me, the innocent questions from the researchers, the sudden windfalls of cash following tragedy, the moronic bragging of my half-brother. It wasn't a series of separate events. It was a network, a conspiracy, my family. For years, I thought their cruelty was a simple, ugly thing, a cocktail of jealousy and resentment. But this was something else, a calculated, monstrous betrayal. They hadn't just used me for my money. They had used my service, my patriotism, my life as a commodity to be sold. My desire to be a good daughter, to answer their questions, to share my life with them. They had weaponized it all against me. I had been their unwitting spy. The pain in my arm was a distant, insignificant ache. It was nothing. A clean break. This was a deep, septic wound. They hadn't just taken my money. They had sold my safety. They had sold the safety of my brothers and sisters in arms. They had sold out my country. The agents finished their questions and left me alone in the silent, humming room. The broken bone was a trivial injury. The real damage was the ragged hole they had just torn through the center of my life. A few minutes later, the heavy door opened and General Hayes stepped inside, his face grim. The air was thick with the horror of what we now both knew. He sat opposite me at the metal table. Finally, he pushed a slim manila file across the table. It was terrifying in its simplicity. "Sergeant," he said, his voice low and heavy, "we need your help. There are details in your calls home that we need to clarify. This is much worse than you think." Inside the cold, sterile walls of the SIF, I thought the worst was over. I thought the horror had reached its peak. I was wrong. The older CID agent slid a final piece of paper across the metal table. It wasn't a document, it was a photograph. My breath caught in my throat. It was a candid shot, taken on a sunny afternoon in Kandahar. A smiling young man with kind eyes and a grease stain on his cheek was patiently showing me how to clear a jam in my M4 rifle. Sergeant Mark Davis. He was a good man, a great NCO, patient, fair, and fiercely protective of his soldiers. He'd been standing less than 10 feet from me when the IED detonated, the same ambush that had sent me home with a concussion and a leg full of shrapnel. The same ambush that had sent Mark home in a flag-draped casket. 2 days before the attack on Sergeant Davis's platoon, the agent said, his voice devoid of emotion, "A final payment of $50,000 was wired to your father's account." He slid a bank statement next to the photo. The date glowed on the paper like a radioactive isotope. 48 hours. "We have reason to believe that information regarding the patrol route, a route your unit had used multiple times and considered safe, was passed along by one of your family members. Passed along, sold." Staring at Mark's smiling face, the full monstrous weight of their betrayal crashed down on me. Before this moment, the pain had been personal. It was my broken arm, my stolen money, my trashed trophies, my lonely holidays. It was all about me. But this wasn't about me anymore. This was about Mark. This was about his wife, who was now a widow. About his 2 little girls who would grow up without a father. This was about honor. This was about a line that had been crossed from which there was no return. The grief inside me, the personal, selfish grief, burned away in an instant, leaving behind something clean, pure, and terrifying. A soldier's rage. This was no longer a family squabble. This was treason. My phone buzzed in the pocket of the general's jacket I was still wearing. I pulled it out. The caller ID read, Linda. A wave of pure, undiluted disgust washed over me. I looked at the agents, then at General Hayes. He simply nodded. I answered the call and put it on speaker. Millie, honey, thank God. Linda's voice was a high-pitched, syrupy performance of manufactured panic. Baby, where are you? These awful military police are harassing us. They've taken our phones. They're asking all these terrible questions. You need to come down here and tell them this is all just a big misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. I stared at Mark's picture. I looked at the date on the bank statement. Misunderstanding. You know I love you, Millie, she cooed, her voice dripping with the fake affection she always used when she wanted something. We're family. You just need to clear this all up. The words, I love you, from the mouth of the woman who had broken my arm, the woman whose greed had put Mark Davis in the ground, were the final straw. They were the last drop of poison in a cup that had been full for years. A switch flipped inside me. The years of quiet suffering, of biting my tongue, of accepting the unacceptable, it all ended. But I didn't scream. I didn't rage. My voice when it came out was terrifyingly calm. It was the voice of a soldier in the moments before a fight when all emotion is stripped away, leaving only a cold, lethal focus. You are not my mother, I said, each word a perfectly formed shard of ice. The line went silent. I could hear her sharp, surprised intake of breath. And this, I continued, my voice never wavering, is not a misunderstanding. This was a choice, and you chose. I ended the call before she could utter another lie. I placed the phone face down on the table with a soft click. The sound echoed the finality of what I had just done. I had severed the last rotten cord that connected me to them. That night, I couldn't stay in the transient barracks they had assigned me. I went back to my own platoon's barracks, back to my room. It was small, Spartan, and it was mine. I stood in front of the small, polished metal mirror in the bathroom, my arm a heavy, throbbing weight in its cast. I looked at my reflection. My face was pale, exhausted, bruised from the inside out. But my eyes were different. The familiar look of weary resignation was gone. In its place, a fire was burning. I met my own gaze and I started to remember. Every single compromise, every silent surrender. I saw the girl pulling her dented trophies from a garbage can. I saw the young soldier eating a sandwich alone in a kitchen on Thanksgiving. I saw the woman in a bunker in Afghanistan, her heart breaking as her brother complained about the thread count of his sheets. Every instance where I had chosen silence, where I had let it go, where I had told myself it was easier not to fight. I leaned in closer, my forehead almost touching the cool metal. I made a vow to the tired, scarred woman looking back at me. Never again, I whispered, my voice hoarse. You will not be silent anymore. You will not make yourself small. You will not let it go. Not this time, for Mark, for Peterson and Jensen, for every soldier whose life they put at risk, and for you. You hear me? For you. If you have ever reached a point where you knew, deep in your soul, that you could not stay silent for one more second, hit that like button. And in the comments, just type the words, never again. Let's create a chorus for everyone who has ever found their voice. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. The rage was gone. The disgust was gone. All that remained was a single, clear purpose. I put on a fresh uniform, my movements precise and efficient. I walked to General Hayes's office. His aide showed me in immediately. He was standing by the window, but he turned as I entered. I didn't wait for him to speak. I walked to the center of the room and came to the position of attention, my good arm straight at my side. My face was a mask of pure military focus. The broken, confused victim was gone. General, sir, I said, and my voice was like steel. I've been their victim for 27 years. Now I want to be the witness that puts them away. A slow, grim smile touched the corners of his mouth. He looked at me, not with the pity he'd shown me yesterday, but with the deep, unwavering respect of a commander looking at one of his own. Welcome back, Sergeant. My declaration in General Hayes's office was a turning point. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The general led me from his office not to another sterile interrogation room, but to the base's Tactical Operations Center. It was a place I'd only ever seen in spy movies. A cavernous, dimly lit room where the air hummed with the quiet energy of serious business. One wall was a mosaic of glowing screens displaying maps, data streams, and encrypted communications. Intelligence officers and analysts sat at their stations, their faces illuminated by the blue light of their monitors, speaking in low, clipped tones. This was the nerve center of the base. This was a war room. General Hayes stood beside a large central briefing table. He, the two CID agents, and a stern-looking woman in a JAG Corps uniform were waiting for me. "Sergeant Porter," the general began, his voice echoing slightly in the vast room. "Welcome to the planning phase." He gestured to the faces around the table. "You have the full and undivided attention of this command. Now, let's get to work." He laid out the strategy, and it was as audacious as it was brilliant. They weren't going to quietly arrest the Porters and let the case disappear into the labyrinth of the military justice system. That would be too easy, too private. Justice, he explained, needed to be as public as the crime. "They tried to strip you of your honor in front of your peers, Sergeant," he said, his eyes locking onto mine with a cold fire. "It is only fitting that they lose theirs in the exact same place, in front of the exact same audience." The plan was set. They would reconvene the awards ceremony. They would turn the scene of my humiliation into the stage for their destruction. "They wanted to make a public spectacle of you," he finished, a grim smile on his face. "We are going to give them a spectacle they will never forget." For the next hour, they walked me through their case. It wasn't a thin file of suspicions. It was a mountain of irrefutable proof. A CID agent handed me a thick, heavy binder. The cover simply read, "Case File, Porter, D. et al." I opened it, and my breath caught. It was all there, a meticulous and damning portrait of their betrayal. It wasn't just the bank statements I had already seen. It was so much more. There were transcripts of audio recordings, grainy but unmistakable, of Linda speaking on the phone with her foreign handler, her voice shifting from the sweet, church lady tone she used with me to a greedy, conspiratorial whisper as she negotiated prices for information. There were printed emails Daniel had sent from a computer at the Charleston Public Library, IP addresses and timestamps neatly logged. He had used a coded language, complaining about the cost of repairs for his old fishing boat in messages that were clearly about selling patrol schedules. They had even found a sworn statement from one of Kyle's local friends, a terrified young man who admitted that Kyle had offered him $500 for details about his brother's deployment schedule from another unit at Fort Stewart. The evidence was an ironclad cage. My testimony, my pain, was no longer just a story. It was the key that locked the door. For the first time, I felt the ground firm up beneath my feet. This wasn't just about my feelings anymore. This was about facts. Hard, cold, undeniable facts. My weapon wasn't just the truth. It was the truth documented, stamped, and cross-referenced. Next came the preparation. The JAG officer, a sharp, no-nonsense major named Hansen, sat with me in a small briefing room for hours. Her job was to turn my 27 years of chaotic emotional pain into a clear, concise, and powerful testimony. "We are not telling a sad story, Sergeant," she told me, her voice firm but not unkind. "We are presenting evidence. You are the primary witness. Your testimony must be factual, precise, and unshakable." We rehearsed it again and again. The first time I tried to recount the story of the trophies, my voice cracked, the 15-year-old girl's sense of helpless rage bubbling to the surface. Major Hansen stopped me. "Again," she said calmly. "Just the facts. What happened? Who was there? What was said? Remove the emotion. Let the facts do the work." We did it again. And again. With each repetition, something shifted inside me. The tremor in my voice disappeared, the lump in my throat dissolved. I was no longer speaking as a wounded daughter, reliving a painful memory. I was speaking as Sergeant First Class Millie Porter, delivering a clear, factual, and damning after-action report on a lifetime of abuse. The pain was still there, but it was no longer in control. I had taken the shrapnel they had embedded in my soul, and was forging it into a weapon. The final piece of the plan was the most crucial: the bait. Their arrogance is their primary vulnerability, General Hayes had said in the war room. They believe they have won. We will use that. He had an officer from his staff, a woman with a kind, reassuring voice, place a call to Linda. I listened to the recording afterward. The officer explained that after a thorough review, the Army had concluded the incident at the ceremony was a private family matter, and all charges against them were being dropped. Furthermore, I had expressed my deep regret and wanted to make a public apology to them at the reconvened ceremony. A full family reconciliation. Linda's reaction was exactly what we'd predicted. She was smug, triumphant, and condescendingly gracious. Well, it's about time she came to her senses, she'd said. Of course, we accept her apology. We'll be there. I knew them so well. The idea of me, the defiant one, finally being brought to heel and forced to apologize publicly would be an irresistible drug. They wouldn't come to reconcile. They would come to gloat. They would come to witness my final public surrender, to savor their ultimate victory in front of the entire community they'd fooled for so long. And that would be their last mistake. That evening, an official announcement was posted on the base's digital bulletin boards and read aloud at the evening formation. Attention all personnel. The awards ceremony from 2 days prior will be reconvened tomorrow at 8:09 hours in the main auditorium. Attendance is mandatory for all available personnel and their families. Lieutenant General Hayes will be making a formal address of critical importance. The trap was set. The players were all moving into position. The battle was about to begin. And for the first time in my life, I was ready for it. The auditorium was filled to capacity, the air thick with a tense, expectant silence. Every soldier not on essential duty was there, their families beside them. They had been told the general had a critical announcement, but the nervous energy in the room suggested they knew this was something more. I stood on the edge of the stage, my arm in a clean white cast, my dress blues crisp and immaculate. From my vantage point, I saw them enter. The Porter family walked in, not with shame, but with an air of insufferable triumph. Linda led the way, a vision in a pastel pink suit, her head held high. She even paused to smile and wave at an acquaintance, the perfect picture of a respected member of the community. My father trailed behind her, his shoulders slightly stooped, but a relieved smirk on his face. And then came Kyle, swaggering in his expensive sneakers, looking around as if he owned the place. They took their seats in the front row, reserved especially for them, and sat back, waiting for the show to begin. They were here for their pound of flesh. They were here to watch me, the rebellious daughter, publicly apologize and beg for their forgiveness. Their arrogance was a physical thing, a sickeningly sweet perfume filling the air around them. I met Linda's gaze across the room. She gave me a small, triumphant smile, a look that said, "See? I always win." I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I simply held her gaze, and for the first time, I felt nothing. Not fear, not anger. Just a cold, distant pity for the pathetic, hollow creature she was. General Hayes strode to the podium. The room fell utterly silent. He adjusted the microphone, his movements calm and deliberate. He looked out at the sea of faces, his gaze sweeping across every soldier, every spouse, every child. Then his eyes settled on the front row. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice a powerful baritone that needed no amplification. "We are gathered today to finish the business that was so violently interrupted 2 days ago." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Linda preened, a self-satisfied look on her face. "We are here to talk about honor," the general continued, his voice hardening. "We are here to talk about sacrifice, and we are here to talk about betrayal." The mood in the room shifted. This wasn't the speech anyone was expecting. 2 days ago, he boomed, his voice ringing with cold fury. "In this very hall, we witnessed a cowardly and disgraceful act of assault against a decorated American soldier. But I am here today to tell you that what you saw was merely the tip of a treacherous iceberg, the visible part of a deep and disgusting rot of treason." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. On the massive screen behind the general, which had been dark until now, an image flashed to life, It was a bank statement. Daniel Porter's name was clearly visible at the top, along with a highlighted deposit for $20,000. My father's face went slack, the color draining from it as if a plug had been pulled. Linda's smile froze, then vanished. The show had begun. One by one, the general laid out the case. Each piece of evidence a hammer blow against their lies. "This is the greed," he declared, as the next slide showed another deposit, this one for $50,000. The next click brought up a sound file. Linda's voice filled the auditorium, sweet and syrupy, captured from a wiretap. "Of course, I can ask her about the patrol schedules." Her recorded voice purred to an unidentified man. "She tells her loving mother everything." The real Linda shot to her feet, her face a mask of disbelief. "That's not me. That's fake." "This is the deception," the general said, his voice overriding her protests. Click. The screen filled with Kyle's idiotic chat logs, his Golden Boy 843 persona, bragging to the world. "My sister is in the third ID. Yeah, she's in Kandahar right now. Total badass." "This is the foolishness that costs lives," the general stated, his voice dripping with contempt. Kyle shrank in his seat, his face crumpling like a child's. Then, the final, devastating blow. The screen changed to show three formal, smiling portraits. Three soldiers in their dress blues: Sergeant Mark Davis, Sergeant Peterson, Corporal Jensen. "And this." The general's voice dropped to a low, guttural roar that shook the very foundation of the hall. "This is the price." He let their faces hang in the silence for a long, heavy moment. "These soldiers," he bellowed, pointing a trembling, furious finger directly at the front row, "did not die at the hands of a foreign enemy. They died because of the craven, bottomless greed of traitors who sit among us right now." Every single head in the room, hundreds of pairs of eyes, swiveled to stare at the Porter family. The looks were no longer curious. They were filled with a burning, unified hatred. That's when the dam broke. "It's a lie! It's a setup! She's framing us!" Linda began to scream, her voice a shrill, hysterical shriek. Daniel was trying to speak, but only incoherent, panicked stammers came out. Kyle was openly sobbing, fat tears rolling down his cheeks, chanting, "I didn't know! I didn't know!" But it was too late. Their judgment had come, not from the general, but from their peers. From the back of the auditorium, a woman in a simple black dress rose to her feet. It was Maria Davis, Mark's widow. Her face was pale, her eyes blazing with a grief so profound it was terrifying. "Murderers!" she screamed, her voice cracking with pain and rage. "You killed my husband! You killed him!" Her cry shattered the last semblance of order. On cue, the side doors of the auditorium burst open and a dozen MPs marched in, moving with grim, practiced efficiency. They formed a cordon, cutting off the front row from the rest of the enraged crowd. Two MPs moved toward Linda, who was still screaming about conspiracies. As they reached for her arms to cuff her, she tried to pull away, stumbling backward. Her heel caught on the leg of a chair. She went down hard. There was a soft snap. The cheap, fake pearl necklace she always wore, her pathetic symbol of class, broke apart. The plastic beads scattered across the polished stage floor, rolling and skittering in every direction like 100 tiny white lies. I stood there, watching it all. I watched them cuff my shrieking stepmother, my babbling father, and my whimpering brother. I watched them being led away past the glares of the soldiers they had betrayed, past the raw grief of the widow they had created. I watched the dynasty of my abusers, my personal reign of terror, and not with a bang, but with the pathetic clatter of fake pearls on a cold, hard floor. The auditorium's chaos faded to an echoing silence. The MPs were gone, the crowd had dispersed, and I was left standing on the stage. My eyes were fixed on the floor, where the cheap plastic beads from Linda's necklace lay scattered like fallen teeth. I had expected to feel a surge of triumph, a wave of vindication. Instead, there was only a strange, hollow quiet, an emptiness. The battle was over, I thought, looking at the pathetic, fake pearls. The enemy was defeated. Now came the hard part. cleaning up the battlefield inside my own soul. In the following days, the story of the traitor Porter family became a firestorm on the local Charleston news and throughout the military community. My name was everywhere, hailed as a hero. But the praise felt distant, like it was about someone else. In the solitude of my barracks room, I felt no glory. I only felt the crushing weight of exhaustion. The white-hot rage that had fueled me had burned itself out. In its place, a deep and ancient sadness settled in my bones. I wasn't mourning the loss of my family. I was mourning the fact that I'd never really had one to begin with. I was grieving for the little girl who tried so desperately to earn their love, for the young woman who sacrificed her happiness for them, for the 27 years I'd wasted hoping that one day they would finally see me. That night, alone in my room, I let myself cry. It wasn't the hot, angry tears of before. It was a quiet, steady weeping, a release of pressure that had been building my entire life. I wasn't crying because I was hurt anymore. I was crying to cleanse myself, to wash away a lifetime of false hope and finally let them go. A week later, a letter arrived with a federal prison postmark. The handwriting was my father's messy scrawl. My hands were steady as I opened it. A small, foolish part of me thought this might be it. The apology. The moment of accountability. I was wrong. The letter was 4 pages of pathetic, self-pitying excuses. He never said, "I'm sorry." He blamed Linda's ambition. He blamed Kyle's stupidity. He blamed his own bad luck. He painted himself as a victim, swept up in a scheme he didn't understand. The letter ended with the one thing he was truly capable of: a request. He begged me to use my new influence with the general, to tell them he was manipulated, to get his sentence reduced. I read the letter twice. The first time, a flicker of the old anger sparked. The second time, all I felt was a profound, weary pity for this weak man who would never take responsibility for his life. That night, I sat at my desk, and I wrote a letter back to him. I didn't hold anything back. I wrote about the trophies in the trash can. I wrote about the lonely Thanksgiving dinner. I wrote about the phone call from Aspen. I wrote about the empty look on his face in the auditorium. I poured 27 years of buried pain onto the pages. When I was done, my hand ached. I read my letter over once, folded it neatly, and walked outside into the cool Georgia night. I took out my Zippo, the same one I'd carried in Afghanistan, and set the letter on fire. I watched as the paper curled and blackened, my words turning to ash and smoke before drifting up into the starry sky. I didn't need him to read it. I didn't need him to understand. I just needed to say it. Burning it was my own private closure. I was releasing the words, and with them, I was releasing him. The final goodbye was the hardest. A JAG lawyer informed me I was needed to identify some personal items for the case file. It was a formality that meant one last visit. I met Kyle in the sterile visiting room of the Federal Detention Center. The swagger and arrogance were gone. He was thin and pale, his eyes wide with terror. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung off his bony frame. He was no longer the golden boy. He was just a scared kid. He started crying the moment he saw me. "Millie, I'm so sorry," he sobbed through the plexiglass divider. "I didn't know what they were doing. I swear, I was so stupid. Please, you have to forgive me." I looked at the boy who had been the center of their universe, the boy for whom all my sacrifices had been made. The anger was gone. The resentment had faded. I picked up the receiver. "I forgive you, Kyle," I said, my voice calm. Relief washed over his face. "But I want you to be clear about this," I continued. "I'm not forgiving you for your sake. I'm forgiving you for mine. I'm letting go of the anger because I refuse to carry it for another second. I forgive you so I can move on. But make no mistake, I will never forget what you did. Goodbye, Kyle." I placed the receiver back in its cradle, stood up, and walked out without looking back. That was the last time I ever saw a member of my blood family. A few days later, General Hayes asked me to take a walk. We strolled along the manicured paths of the base. "Courage isn't about having no scars, Sergeant," he said, his eyes on the horizon. "Courage is knowing those scars don't define you. They're just a map that shows where you've been, not where you're going." He stopped and turned to me. I've been thinking. We're starting a new mentorship program for young female recruits. A lot of them are struggling. They need a guide, someone tough who's been through the fire and come out stronger. He looked at me, a genuine smile in his eyes. I think you'd be the perfect person to lead it. And just like that, I saw it. A new path forward, a new purpose. My journey didn't end with the destruction of my old family. It was just the beginning. I had a new mission, to build a new legacy of strength and support, to make sure no other soldier ever had to fight their battles completely alone. The military tribunal was swift and decisive. The mountain of evidence presented by the prosecution was so overwhelming that a conviction was a foregone conclusion. Linda, Daniel, and Kyle Porter were all found guilty of conspiracy, espionage, and treason. The judge, a stern-faced colonel who had looked at them with undisguised contempt throughout the trial, handed down sentences that ensured they would spend the majority of their remaining lives behind bars. The Porter name, once a source of phony, middle-class pride in Charleston, became a synonym for traitor. The law had done its job. Justice, in the cold procedural sense, had been served. But I knew, deep in my soul, that my real justice, my true healing, wasn't going to be found in a courtroom. It had to be built, piece by piece, in the ruins of the life they had almost destroyed. 6 months after the trial, I stood on a different kind of stage. It was a small auditorium at Fort Jackson, the very place my own journey had begun. But this time, I wasn't a scared, lonely private. I was a sergeant first class. And my audience was a room full of young female recruits, their faces a mixture of bravado, excitement, and the same deep-seated fear I remembered so well. General Hayes's mentorship program had become my new mission. I didn't stand before them as a hero or a celebrity. I spoke to them as a survivor. I told them my story, not the salacious details of the trial, but the quiet, painful truths of my upbringing. I talked about the lonely struggle for self-worth, about the danger of letting others define you, and about the critical importance of setting boundaries, even with the people who are supposed to love you most. There's a writer and researcher I admire, Dr. Brené Brown, I told them, my voice steady and clear. She has this quote that I carry with me every single day. She says, "Only when we are brave enough to explore the darkness will we discover the infinite power of our light." I looked out at their young, hopeful faces. The Army will teach you to be physically tough, but your true strength, your resilience, will come from being brave enough to face your own darkness. And you never have to do it alone. After the talk, a young private, no older than 19, came up to me. Her eyes were red from crying. "Sergeant," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "thank you. No one's ever told me it was okay to say no to my family." She hugged me, a fierce, desperate embrace, and I hugged her back, feeling the profound, healing power of turning my deepest wounds into someone else's shield. The final piece of my journey, my own private mission, took place a year after that first, terrible day in the auditorium. I stood in the pre-dawn chill of a crisp autumn morning, the air smelling of wet leaves and clean, cold stone. I was at Arlington National Cemetery. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the endless, rolling hills of perfectly aligned white headstones. In the stillness of that sacred place, I found them. 3 graves, side by side. Sergeant Mark Davis, Sergeant Peterson, Corporal Jensen. I had brought 3 perfect, long-stemmed red roses. I knelt down, my knees pressing into the damp, cold grass, and placed 1 rose at the base of each headstone. I traced Mark's name with my fingers, the carved letters cold against my skin. I didn't cry. The time for tears was over. I stood up, brushed off my knees, and came to the position of attention. My hand snapped up in a sharp, perfect salute. I held it there, a silent promise to the men who lay beneath the grass. A final report. "Mission complete," I whispered to the quiet morning air. "Rest easy, brothers. Your honor has been satisfied." A gentle breeze rustled through the old oak trees, sending a shower of golden leaves drifting down around me. As I stood there, a profound sense of peace settled over me, a quiet so deep and complete it felt like a blessing. The weight I had been carrying on my shoulders for 27 years, the burden of their hate, their greed, their expectations. It was finally, truly, gone. I'm telling you this story today for a reason, and as I finish, I want you to look me in the eye. I used to think that family was about blood, that it was an unbreakable bond you were born into. For better or for worse, I was wrong. Family is not about blood. Family is about honor. It's about loyalty. Family is about the people who stand with you in the foxhole, not the ones who push you into the line of fire. If you are fighting a battle of your own right now, in a foxhole that feels lonely and dark, I want you to remember this. You are not alone. Look for your comrades. Find your chosen family. The ones who will fight alongside you, who will have your back no matter what. Know that setting a boundary to protect yourself isn't selfish. It's a tactical act of survival. And most importantly, please remember this. The scars you carry, the ones on the inside that no one else can see, are not signs of weakness. They are not something to be ashamed of. They are a map. They are proof of every battle you have endured. They are a testament to the fact that you fought and you won. Thank you for being here and for listening to my story. My war at home is finally over, but I know that for many of you, the battle is ongoing. This channel was created to be a place for survivors, a digital foxhole where we can share our stories and draw strength from one another. If my journey has resonated with you, please hit the like button to show your support. Subscribe to join our community so that no soldier ever has to fight alone again. And in the comments below, please share one word of strength for someone else who might need to hear it today. Thank you for being part of my chosen family.